Now, in order to consider amendment number 18, printed in Part B of House Report 118-30. For what purpose does the gentleman from Florida seek recognition?
Madam Chair, I have an amendment at the desk.
Okay, go ahead. The clerk would designate the amendment.
Amendment number 18, printed in Part B of House Report number 118-30, offered by Mr. Donalds of Florida.
Pursuant to House Resolution 260, the gentleman from Florida, Mr. Donalds, and a member opposed each will control 5 minutes. The chair recognizes the gentleman from Florida.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I rise in support of this amendment. What this amendment really does is it requires a study on America's current uranium supply, specifically looking into the status of and the quality of such domestic uranium deposits, and it seeks policy solutions relating to America's domestic uranium challenges. My amendment also requires an analysis of America's supply in comparison to other countries around the globe. In short, Madam Chair, if you're going to embrace nuclear power in the United States, we also have to understand what our uranium needs are. We have to be able to assess them, and that's what the nature of my amendment does. And I would like to yield a minute to Mr. Self from Texas to talk about this amendment as well.
Gentleman is recognized.
Madam Speaker, I rise in support of Representative Donalds' amendment. The most logical path forward for clean, reliable electrical supply is nuclear power. The U.S. Navy operates 80 nuclear-powered vessels with more than 5,400 reactor years of accident-free operation. The face of nuclear power is changing to a generation of small modular reactors that deliver power with lower initial capital costs and more flexibility in placement. Today, we import 95% of our high-assay, low-enriched uranium from Russia. A startling quote in a Reuters article says that without Moscow, the U.S. nuclear power industry could collapse in 1 to 1.5 years. Today, I speak for Mr. Donalds' amendment, which will help lead America back to total energy abundance by finding and evaluating American sources of uranium. If you want a Green New Deal, this is it. I yield back.
Gentleman from Florida reserves.
I reserve.
For what purpose does gentleman from Florida, Arizona, seek recognition?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I ask for unanimous consent to claim the time in opposition, although I'm not necessarily opposed.
Without objection, the gentleman is recognized for 5 minutes.
The amendment offered by my colleague from Florida, Mr. Donalds, requires the Secretary to submit a report to Congress that includes the status of uranium deposits in the U.S., information on the quality of these deposits compared to the rest of the world, and policy considerations regarding the use of these deposits. Although this amendment concerns only the making of a report, I want to take a moment to highlight the history of uranium mining in this country as it relates to our indigenous communities. One example I use is the Navajo Nation. From the 1940s to the 1980s, nearly 30 million tons of uranium ore were extracted from the nation's lands, exposing generations of tribal members to the contamination that permeated these sites. After the mining companies were done, they simply left their operations and failed to engage in any cleanup measures. Today, there are over 500 abandoned uranium mines on the tribal nation's lands, and this continues to be a serious concern for the nation's tribal leadership as we speak. As you can imagine, these mines have contaminated to chronic health outcomes among tribal members, have left countless homes and water sources with elevated levels of radiation. So when we consider the status of uranium mining in this country, we must also consider the inevitable history that this industry has exposed upon specifically tribal communities. I hope that in addition to the information my colleague would like to be included in the amendments report, that we can also work to include a survey of the industry's historical practices and expected challenges and outcomes to local communities, surrounding communities. And with that, I reserve the balance.
Gentleman reserves. Gentleman from Florida is recognized.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I just want to say it's important for us to understand that there are two key investments that America is going to need to make. One is increasing our domestic uranium mining capabilities, and number two is bolstering our domestic uranium conversion and enrichment capabilities. If the concerns of the United States are to find a way to increase baseload power and also the necessary concern about emissions, then nuclear power is the path forward for that. But we have to take stock of our uranium capabilities here in the United States. And with that, I yield the balance of my time to the gentleman, the chair of the Transportation and Infrastructure, the Natural Resources Committee, Mr. Westerman. I gave you a different title, Mr. Westerman, sorry.
I thank the gentleman for yielding, and Madam Chair, I rise in support of this amendment. We have spoken about the link between Hard Rock Minerals and national security today, but there's one resource highlighted by this amendment that must be discussed, and that's uranium. Domestic uranium is essential for national security given its role in nuclear deterrence, empowering naval nuclear propulsion program. But uranium also supports the United States biomedical community because it is vital to the protection of medical isotopes. And as the gentleman has pointed out, unfortunately, the majority of our uranium supply comes from Russia and former Soviet bloc countries. We have ample deposits of uranium here in the United States. We just have to mine it, and we have to process it, and we need to use more of it to create more nuclear power. I thank the gentleman for bringing this amendment. I support it, and I yield back.
Gentleman reserves.
reserve.
Gentleman from Arizona is now recognized.
Thank you, Madam Chair. My comments about the uranium mining and the reports as requested in this amendment, I'm not arguing with the request. My point is that there's a history here of impacted communities. What do we do with waste? That challenge, the contamination, the cleanup requirements, what are the company's responsibilities? Those should all be part of a survey. And if we're aggressively pursuing uranium as a source, then we need to aggressively pursue the protections and the information and the intended and unintended consequences of uranium mining, of which we have a history. That is the request. With that, I yield back the balance of my time.
Gentleman, ears back. Gentleman from Florida is now recognized.
I thank the gentleman from Arizona about his concerns, and that's something I would definitely want to work forward on, to work on as we move forward. And with that, I yield back the balance of my time.
Question is on the amendment offered by the gentleman from Florida. Those in favor say aye. Those opposed say no. In the opinion of the chair, the ayes have it. The amendment is agreed to.